Story number 1. The Phantom Hitchhiker. It was a typical night on the road, the kind that truckers like me are all too familiar with. The highway stretched out endlessly before me, a dark ribbon cutting through the desolate landscape. I had been driving for hours, my eyes heavy with fatigue, but I was determined to make it to my next stop before dawn. As I rounded a bend, my headlights caught a figure standing by the side of the road. It was a woman, her clothes tattered and her hair a wild mess. She looked desperate, her thumb outstretched in the universal gesture of a hitchhiker. Against my better judgment, I decided to pull over. "Need a ride?" I called out, rolling down the window. She nodded, her eyes wide with fear. "Please, I need to get out of here." I unlocked the door and she climbed in, her hands trembling. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea how much this means to me." "No problem," I replied, trying to sound casual. "Where are you headed?" "Just up the road a bit," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll tell you when to stop." We drove in silence for a while, the only sound the hum of the engine and the occasional bump of the tires on the road. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about her. Her clothes were dirty and torn, and she kept glancing nervously out the window. "Are you okay?" I asked, trying to break the tension. She nodded, but didn't say anything. I decided not to press her and focused on the road ahead. After what felt like an eternity, she finally spoke up. "You should turn off here," she said, pointing to a narrow dirt road that branched off from the highway. I hesitated. "Are you sure? This doesn't look like a main road." "Trust me," she insisted. "It's a shortcut." Against my better judgment, I turned onto the dirt road. The trees closed in around us, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out what little light there was. The road was rough, and I had to slow down to avoid the potholes. "How much further?" I asked, trying to keep the nervousness out of my voice. "Not far," she replied, her eyes darting around as if she expected something to jump out at us. We drove for another few minutes before she told me to stop. "This is it," she said, pointing to a small clearing up ahead. I pulled over and turned off the engine. "Are you sure this is the right place?" I asked, looking around. There was nothing here but trees and darkness. "Yes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for the ride." She got out of the truck and disappeared into the trees. I watched her go, a sense of unease settling over me. Something about this didn't feel right. I decided to turn around and get back to the main road as quickly as possible. As I started the truck, I heard a noise behind me. It was a low, guttural growl like an animal. I turned around, but there was nothing there. I shook my head, telling myself it was just my imagination, and put the truck in reverse. The growling grew louder, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw a pair of glowing eyes staring back at me. My heart pounded in my chest as I slammed on the gas, the tires spinning in the dirt before finally catching and propelling the truck forward. I sped down the dirt road, the trees whipping past in blur. The growling followed me, growing louder and more menacing. I didn't dare look back. All I could think about was getting back to the highway and away from whatever was chasing me. Just when I thought I was safe, the truck lurched to a stop. I had hit a pothole and the front tire was stuck. I tried to reverse, but the truck wouldn't budge. Panic set in as the growling grew closer. I fumbled with my seatbelt, my hands shaking, and threw open the door. I ran into the forest, branches scratching at my face and arms. The growling was right behind me, and I could hear the sound of heavy footsteps. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away. I stumbled into a clearing and saw a small cabin in the distance. I ran towards it, hoping to find help. The door was unlocked, and I burst inside, slamming it shut behind me. The cabin was dark and empty, but at least it felt safe. I leaned against the door, trying to catch my breath. The growling had stopped, and for a moment, I thought I was safe. Then I heard a voice. "You shouldn't have come here." I turned around and saw the woman standing in the shadows. Her eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and her mouth twisted into a sinister smile. "You were supposed to take me home," she said, stepping closer. "Now you'll never leave." I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. "What do you want?" She laughed, a cold, hollow sound that sent chills down my spine. "I want you to join me," she said, "forever." I turned and ran for the door, but it was too late. The last thing I heard was her laughter echoing in my ears as darkness closed in around me. Story number 2, The Abandoned Truck Stop. Driving through the night was something I had grown accustomed to over the years. The long stretches of highway, the occasional rest stop, and the endless cups of coffee were all part of the job. But there was one night that stood out from all the rest, a night that still haunts me to this day. I was on a long haul, making my way through a remote part of the country. The road was empty, and the only light came from my headlights cutting through the darkness. I had been driving for hours and was starting to feel the effects of fatigue. I decided to pull over at the next truck stop and get some rest. I spotted a sign for a truck stop up ahead and took the exit. The place looked deserted, the parking lot empty and the lights flickering. I parked my truck and got out, stretching my legs and taking a deep breath of the cool night air. I walked towards the building, hoping to find a cup of coffee and maybe a snack. The door creaked open and I stepped inside. The place was eerily quiet, the only sound the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. "Hello," I called out, but there was no response. I walked to the counter and rang the bell, but still, no one came. I was about to leave when I heard a noise coming from the back. It sounded like someone moving around. I hesitated for a moment, then decided to investigate. I walked down the narrow hallway, the sound growing louder with each step. I reached the door at the end of the hall and pushed it open. The room was dark, but I could make out the shape of a man standing in the corner. "Hello," I said again, my voice trembling. The man turned around and I felt a chill run down my spine. His eyes were empty, his face pale and gaunt. He took a step towards me and I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer, just kept moving closer. I turned and ran back down the hallway, my footsteps echoing in the empty building. I burst through the door and out into the parking lot, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I jumped into my truck and locked the doors, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. I started the engine and sped out of the parking lot, not daring to look back. As I drove down the highway, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the man standing in the middle of the road, his eyes glowing in the darkness. I didn't stop until I reached the next town, my heart still racing. I went to the police and told them what had happened, but they didn't believe me. They said the truck stop had been abandoned for years, and there was no way anyone could have been there. I never went back to that part of the country again. The memory of that night still haunts me, a reminder of the things that lurk in the darkness, waiting for unsuspecting travelers. Story number 3, The Haunted Highway. The open road had always been my escape, a place where I could leave my troubles behind and lose myself in the endless miles of asphalt. But one night, that sense of freedom turned into a nightmare that I would never forget. I was driving through a remote stretch of highway, the kind where you can go for miles without seeing another car. The night was dark and moonless, the only light coming from my headlights cutting through the inky blackness. I had been on the road for hours, my eyes heavy with fatigue. I decided to pull over at the next rest area and get some sleep. I spotted a sign for a rest area up ahead and took the exit. The place was deserted, the parking lot empty and the lights flickering. I parked my truck and got out, stretching my legs and taking a deep breath of the cool night air. I walked towards the restroom, hoping to freshen up before getting some sleep. The rest area was eerily quiet, the only sound the distant hum of the highway. I pushed open the door to the restroom and stepped inside. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting an unsettling glow on the cracked tiles and grimy mirrors. As I washed my hands, I heard a faint whisper behind me. I turned around, but there was no one there. I shook my head, telling myself it was just my imagination, fried my hands. I was about to leave when I heard the whisper again, louder this time. "Help me!" I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The voice was coming from one of the stalls. I took a step closer, my hands trembling. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing in the empty restroom. "Please help me." I pushed open the door to the stall and gasped. There was no one there, but the words, "Help me," were scrawled on the wall in what looked like blood. I stumbled back, my mind bracing. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of sick joke. I ran out of the restroom and back to my truck, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I jumped into the cab and locked the doors, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. I started the engine and sped out of the rest area, not daring to look back. As I drove down the highway, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw a figure standing in the middle of the road, its eyes glowing in the darkness. I blinked, and it was gone. I kept driving, my heart racing, my mind replaying the events of the night over and over. I didn't stop until I reached the next town, the lights of civilization a welcome sight. I pulled into a truck stop and parked, my hands still trembling. I went inside and ordered a cup of coffee, hoping it would calm my nerves. The place was busy, the sounds of conversation and clinking dishes a comforting contrast to the eerie silence of the rest area. I took a seat at the counter and tried to collect my thoughts. "Rough night?" the waitress asked, setting the coffee in front of me. "You have no idea," I replied, taking a sip of the hot, bitter liquid. She gave me a sympathetic smile. "I've heard some strange stories about that stretch of highway. You're not the first trucker to come in here looking like they've seen a ghost." I nodded, my mind still reeling. "What do you know about it?" She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "They say it's haunted. That people have seen things out there, things that can't be explained. Some say it's the spirits of those who died in accidents. Others say it's something darker." I shivered, the memory of the whispering voice and the bloody message still fresh in my mind. I don't know what I saw, but it was real. "Too real." She nodded, her expression serious. "Be careful out there. The road can be a dangerous place, especially at night." I finished my coffee and thanked her, then headed back to my truck. I still had a long way to go, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. As I drove through the night, the darkness seemed to close in around me, the highway stretching out endlessly before me. I kept my eyes on the road, my hands gripping the wheel, determined to make it to my destination. But deep down, I knew that I would never forget that night, the night when the road turned into a nightmare, and the darkness revealed its true, terrifying nature.